Hello everyone. I'm the storyteller from the channel Whispered Tales and I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from? At what time are you watching? Now, get comfortable and relax. I remember the first time I saw the house. It was late in the evening, and the dying sun stretched its thin fingers across the tops of the pine trees, casting long shadows over the cracked driveway. I hadn't planned to be there, not really. But something about that winding forest road, that faded sign half hidden by ivy, had drawn me in. The air was cold for late summer, and the silence around me was unsettling in its completeness. No birdsong, no wind through the leaves, only the soft ticking of my car engine cooling in the driveway and the faint hum of my own breath. The house itself sat back from the road, slouched among the trees like an old, forgotten thought. The paint was peeling, windows blind with dust. Yet somehow, it wasn't derelict. It looked, waiting. I should have left then. I should have turned back down that lonely forest road. But curiosity has always been my failing. So, I walked toward it. The porch creaked beneath my steps like it was remembering old footsteps. I paused, hand resting on the tarnished doorknob, listening. For what, I couldn't tell. But there was something, some soft noise beneath the hush of the pines. It almost sounded like breathing. I shook off the thought and pushed the door open. The air inside was cold, colder than outside, carrying the scent of damp wood and something older, something sour and metallic, faint but persistent. The entryway was dim, lit only by the final gold light leaking through the grimy windows. Dust motes spun lazily in the beams, swirling like tiny phantoms. The house wasn't large. A single hallway stretched ahead, with a few doors leading left and right. At the far end, a narrow staircase climbed into darkness. I told myself I would just look around for a minute. Just to satisfy that creeping curiosity gnawing at my ribs. Then I'd leave. But the house had other plans. My footsteps were the only sound, except for the occasional pop of wood contracting in the cooling night. I walked into what must have once been a living room. A fireplace crouched in one corner, its mouth gaping and black. On the mantel, I saw a photograph. I wiped away the grime with the sleeve of my jacket and peered at the faded image. A family. Mother, father, a child standing between them. All three with blank expressions, their eyes staring straight through the lens. Straight through time. Straight through me. I turned the photo over. No date, no names. The floor creaked behind me. I froze. For a long moment, I didn't move. I simply stood there, heart beating slow and heavy, listening. Nothing. When I finally turned around, the room was empty. I took a deep breath and laughed softly, though it sounded thin and hollow in the quiet room. It was an old house. Of course it made noises. Old houses always do. But then I noticed something odd. There, in the thin layer of dust coating the wooden floor, were footsteps. Small ones. Like a child's. They led from the far corner of the room to where I stood, and then stopped. No prints leading away. As if whoever made them was still there. Watching. I backed slowly out of the room and into the hallway. The sun had vanished completely now. The house was submerged in shadow. I thought of leaving. I should have. But that same strange pull kept my feet rooted in place. I glanced toward the staircase at the end of the hall. Its steps seemed to recede into darkness like the throat of some great beast, waiting, expectant. I told myself I wouldn't go up. I told myself I was done. That I'd seen enough. And yet, step by hesitant step, I crossed the hall. The staircase groaned beneath my weight, each step complaining in the silence. When I reached the landing, I hesitated. There was a door there, slightly ajar. A faint whispering drifted through the crack. It was so soft I thought at first it might be the wind. But the air was still. I leaned closer, straining to hear. The whispers were fragmented, like broken sentences caught on the edge of sleep. Can't stay here, watching, from the dark, never, alone, a chill crawled down my spine. I pushed the door open slowly. The room beyond was bare except for an old iron bed frame against the far wall and a cracked mirror hanging crookedly above it. The whispering stopped as soon as I entered. I stepped inside, my shoes disturbing the dust on the floor. There, in the mirror's cracked surface, I saw something that made my breath hitch. For just a moment, barely a second, I saw a figure standing behind me. Small. Pale. Eyes wide and unblinking. A child. I spun around, heart hammering. But there was no one there. I stood frozen in place, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. And then, from the corner of the room, I heard it. A laugh. Soft, high-pitched, and hollow as an empty cradle. It faded almost as soon as it began, leaving behind a silence far heavier than before. I backed out of the room, pulling the door closed behind me. The air in the hallway felt colder now. Denser, like I was breathing through water. I didn't know what this place was, who the family in the photo were, or why their child's footsteps still wandered the dusty floors. But I knew one thing. I wasn't alone in that house. And maybe, just maybe, I never had been. I made my way back down the stairs, the house groaning with each step, as though protesting my escape. Outside, the night had deepened. The pines stood still as stone, their black needles swallowing what little light remained. I paused on the porch, hand on the railing. The wind stirred for the first time that evening, whispering through the trees in a voice that almost sounded like words. I listened, heart still racing. And in that moment, in the hush between gusts of wind, I thought I heard it again. The faintest echo of laughter. From inside the house. Waiting. Child's sleep didn't come easily that night. Back in my car, parked just beyond the tree line, I listened to the steady hum of the crickets, the faint rustle of the pines, and my own restless breathing. Even with the doors locked and the headlights off, the house loomed in my mind. Its sagging roof. Its blind windows. That cold, empty room where the whispers had faded, and the cracked mirror had briefly shown me something I still wasn't sure I believed. I tried to laugh it off, to convince myself I was tired, my mind playing tricks. But the feeling wouldn't leave me. There was something in that house. And worse. It knew I had been there. I awoke before dawn, a thin mist creeping low through the trees. Despite everything, a part of me burned with the need to return. I needed answers. Why had that house been abandoned, yet untouched by time's usual cruelty? Why had I seen those footprints? And what was that soft, childish laugh, drifting through the dark like a forgotten lullaby? Against my better judgment, I stepped from the car, the morning chill biting through my jacket. The house watched me from behind the pines, waiting. Inside, the air was still cold. Colder than outside, as though the walls trapped the night itself. The sunlight barely pierced the grimy windows, leaving the corners drowned in shadow. I walked slowly, taking in the details I'd missed the night before. There were children's drawings tacked to the hallway walls. Faded and torn, sketched in colored pencil. Stick figures with hollow eyes. Tall spindly trees with sharp black branches. A crude shape that might have been the house itself, with dark smoke curling from the chimney like a reaching hand. Beneath one drawing, written in a child's uncertain hand, were the words, "I hear them at night." I turned away, an uneasy feeling settling in my chest. I moved from room to room, the silence pressing against my ears. The kitchen was nearly empty, save for a cracked porcelain doll sitting upright on the dusty counter. Its painted eyes stared at me with a wide, frozen smile. I didn't touch it. Somehow, I knew better. In the corner of the kitchen, a narrow door led down to the basement. The handle was cold beneath my fingers. I hesitated. The house felt different now. Not hostile, exactly. But, aware. I opened the door and peered down into the dark. A faint, steady dripping echoed from below, like the slow ticking of an invisible clock. I told myself I'd just take a quick look. Nothing more. The basement stairs creaked beneath my weight. The air down there was thick and damp, laced with the faint scent of rust and earth. As my eyes adjusted, I saw the basement wasn't empty. Old shelves lined the walls, cluttered with forgotten jars and rusted tools. And in the center of the room, beneath the single dangling light bulb, sat a child's rocking horse. It was worn, one eye missing, its paint peeling like cracked skin. And though the air was still, it rocked. Slowly. Back. And forth. I stood frozen, the quiet creak of its motion filling the room. There was no breeze. No reason it should move. And yet, it did. I stepped back, heart thudding softly in my ears. From somewhere behind me, the whispers returned. Fainter now, almost gentle. "Stay with me, don't leave, it's lonely." I left the basement then, as calmly as I could. The door closed behind me with a hollow click, as though sealing something away once more. Back in the kitchen, I paused, steadying my breath. I didn't want to admit it, but I felt it. A presence. Not angry, but sad. Lonely. Waiting for someone to notice. I made my way upstairs again, this time exploring the other rooms. One of them looked like it had once been a child's bedroom. The wallpaper was faded with a pattern of stars and moons, peeling away from the corners like old skin. A small wooden bed stood against the wall, its blanket neatly folded as though waiting for someone to return. On the nightstand, beneath a thin layer of dust, sat a single book. A children's storybook, its title faded from years of sunlight. I opened it gently. On the inside cover was a name, written in careful cursive, "For Lily. Sweet dreams, always. Lily." The child in the photo? The one whose footsteps had crossed the living room floor? I closed the book softly, as though afraid to wake something sleeping nearby. The wind outside shifted, brushing against the house with a sigh. And for a brief moment, I felt it again. Not fear, but sadness. Deep and endless as the woods outside. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened. No footsteps now. No laughter. Just the slow, steady breathing of the house itself. I wondered who Lily had been. What had happened here? Had she been left alone, forgotten by time? Had she waited, night after night, for someone to come home, until the walls swallowed her voice and the shadows became her only company? A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Not heavy. Light. Like a child's step. I stood and crossed the room, pausing at the door. The hallway stretched before me, empty and dim. But then, a glimpse. At the far end of the hall, near the staircase, the briefest flicker of a figure. Small. Pale. Gone in an instant. I followed, my steps slow and careful, barely making a sound. Down the stairs, through the entryway, and out onto the porch. The air was colder now. The sky above a washed-out gray, the pines shifting softly in the morning wind. I looked around but saw no one. Only the empty woods, silent and still. For a while, I just stood there, listening to the quiet. And in that stillness, I felt something shift. The house was no longer just an old building. It was a memory. A memory caught in a loop, playing over and over. Waiting for someone to see it. To understand. I didn't leave right away. Instead, I sat on the porch steps, watching the mist rise between the trees, letting the calm wash over me despite the lingering chill. I knew I would return. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. There was something here. Something unfinished. A story that needed to be heard. And whether I liked it or not, I was already part of it. Past I returned the next afternoon. The woods greeted me in their usual way, silent and unmoving, as if they had been holding their breath since I left. The house stood waiting, unchanged and still. I noticed now how the pine needles carpeted the roof, how vines curled gently around the porch posts, weaving themselves into the wood like ancient veins. The house wasn't abandoned. It was sleeping. Waiting for someone to wake it up again. Inside, the air had grown colder, yet strangely familiar. It no longer felt like I was entering a stranger's home. It felt like I was returning to a place I almost remembered, though I knew I had never been there before. Dust still hung in the sunlight like lazy ghosts, turning slowly in the quiet. I moved through the rooms, slower this time, letting my fingers brush against the faded wallpaper and time-worn furniture. Nothing stirred, but the sense of presence was stronger now. Not threatening. Just watching. In the living room, I found a small desk tucked beneath a broken window. Its surface was cluttered with yellowed papers, the ink faded but still legible. I gently unfolded one of them. It was a letter. The handwriting was elegant, careful. It read, "Dearest Eleanor, Lily has been restless again. The nights seem colder, and she speaks of voices in the walls. I've checked again and again, there's nothing there, of course. But she insists. Says they whisper to her when the house grows quiet. I fear the isolation weighs on her mind. I pray this is only the imagination of a lonely child. It was unsigned. I carefully folded the letter and placed it back on the desk, my mind turning over the words. Lily wasn't simply a child who once lived here. She was a child who was afraid. And her fear had soaked into these walls. As I sat by the desk, a breeze stirred the curtains, lifting them like pale hands. For a moment, I thought I smelled something sweet, lavender, faint and fleeting. Like the scent of someone who had just passed through the room. But when I turned, there was no one. Only the quiet, and the feeling of having missed something important by a breath. I explored further. In what must have been the parents' bedroom, I found an old journal lying on the nightstand. The pages were brittle, crumbling at the edges, but I managed to read some of the entries. July 3rd, the voices came again last night. Lily screamed until dawn. I could not find the source. Nor could I quiet her fears. July 10th, Eleanor is ill. The house feels colder with each passing day. I feel it too now, watching me from the corners. August 2nd, the forest has grown silent. Even the birds have left us. Only whispers remain. The journal ended there. No explanation, no closure. Just silence. Like someone had simply stopped writing in the middle of their life. I closed the journal softly and sat in the stillness. I wondered what it must have been like, living here, alone, as the house slowly filled with unseen things. Whispers in the night. Cold breaths on your skin. Loneliness deeper than sleep. I began to feel it too. Not fear, exactly. But a kind of sorrow. A quiet sadness that settled in my bones and made the rooms feel heavier than before. Later, as evening fell and shadows stretched long across the walls, I sat in the child's bedroom. The small bed, the faded stars on the wallpaper, the worn book on the nightstand. I imagined Lily lying there, small and frightened, listening to the house breathe around her. And in the stillness, I whispered aloud, "Lily, I know you're here." The words felt strange in the quiet. But they didn't go unanswered. From the far corner of the room, I heard it. A soft sigh, barely more than the shifting of the air. Then, faintly, the creak of a floorboard. I didn't move. I simply waited, letting the quiet fill the space between us. After a while, I spoke again, softer now. "It's okay. I'm listening." The house settled around me, groaning softly as the temperature dropped. And then, I felt it. A faint warmth, brushing against my hand. Like a small hand, resting in mine for the briefest moment. And then gone. I stayed until night fell completely, and the house was filled with darkness. I didn't turn on a light. I sat in the quiet, letting the night press against the windows, the forest whispering outside. For the first time since I'd arrived, I didn't feel like an intruder. I felt like a witness. Someone meant to see this story, to carry it beyond these silent walls. Eventually, I made my way back downstairs. The rocking horse in the basement had stopped moving. The whispers were quiet now, resting beneath the floorboards and in the cracks of the walls. Even the laughter, distant and hollow, had faded into memory. But something had changed. The house no longer felt like it was waiting. It felt like it had been heard. At least for now. I stepped outside. The night air was cool and damp, the mist curling low across the ground. The forest stretched endlessly around me, silent but alive. I stood for a moment, breathing it in. And in the hush between the breeze and the stillness, I heard it. Not a laugh this time. Not a whisper. But a soft voice, carried gently on the wind. "Thank you." I turned, but there was no one there. Only the trees, standing watch. And the house, quiet once more. I walked away slowly, not looking back. The story wasn't finished. I knew that much. But for now, the house could rest. And so could I. Pines that night, I slept in the car. I left the house behind me, its dark windows staring quietly through the branches. But even with distance between us, sleep did not come easily. The forest seemed too still. No owls. No crickets. Only the hush of the trees, leaning closer in the darkness. I drifted off eventually, but my dreams were filled with places I had never seen, and voices I had already heard. In the dream, I stood once again before the house. Only this time, it was whole. Its paint unpeeled, its windows clear and shining in the golden light of late afternoon. Laughter drifted through the open door, soft and warm, like sunlight on wood floors. I stepped inside. The rooms were filled with life. A woman in a long dress hummed softly as she tidied the kitchen. A man sat in a chair by the fire, reading aloud from a leather-bound book. And there, at the foot of the stairs, stood Lily. Small and smiling, her pale dress swaying gently as she turned to me. "Are you staying for supper?" she asked, her voice as clear as wind in the pines. I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could speak, the light in the room flickered. The warmth faded. The laughter thinned. And one by one, they disappeared. Darkness crept back into the corners. The fireplace cold. The kitchen empty. The house quiet once more. Lily was the last to fade, her smile lingering even as her shape blurred into the shadows. "Don't forget me," she whispered, and then she was gone. I woke with a start, my breath clouding in the chilly morning air. The forest was still silent. And the house, though distant behind the trees, felt somehow closer than before. I spent the morning walking through the woods. The pine needles softened my steps, and the sun struggled to break through the thick canopy overhead. Despite the chill, there was peace in the stillness. But no matter how far I walked, the sense of being watched never left me. It wasn't threatening. Just waiting. As though the forest itself knew I wasn't finished with the story. By midday, I found a small clearing. At its center stood an old stone well, half hidden beneath vines and moss. Its stones were worn smooth, and a wooden bucket lay toppled beside it, long forgotten. I approached cautiously, peering down into its depths. The well was dry. But faintly, so faintly I could barely hear it over my own breathing, a whisper rose from below. "Help her," the words were so soft, I could almost convince myself I imagined them. But I knew better. The forest, the house, the dreams, all pieces of the same forgotten story. Lily's story. And somehow, the well was part of it too. I sat beside the well for a while, listening to the wind stir through the trees. Birds began to sing again, faint and distant, as if the morning's quiet spell was finally lifting. I let the warmth of the afternoon sun rest on my face, grounding myself in something real. But even then, beneath the ordinary sounds of the forest, the whispers lingered. Patient. Soft. Waiting for me to return. As evening approached, I walked back toward the house. This time, I wasn't afraid. Curious, perhaps. Wary, of course. But no longer afraid. The house had shown me a glimpse of what it once was. Now, it was asking for something more. Not my fear, but my understanding. Inside, the air welcomed me like a familiar chill. I wandered through the rooms once more, searching for anything I'd missed. In the study, I found another letter tucked behind a loose brick in the fireplace. The paper was brittle, its corners stained with age, but the handwriting was unmistakably the same. Eleanor, it grows worse. Lily no longer plays outside. She speaks to corners where no one stands. I have heard them now too, whispering my name as the night stretches long. I do not know how to save her. I fear I have failed. The letter ended without a signature. But I could feel the weight of its final words pressing against the quiet walls. A family alone, trapped within something they could neither fight nor flee. In the attic, beneath the slant of the roof, I found a small chest. Its lock had long since rusted away, leaving the lid loose. Inside, faded photographs stared back at me. A man, a woman, and Lily. Smiling in the garden. Standing by the well. Gathered in the living room, the fire burning warmly behind them. Moments captured before the shadows came. I sat there for a while, turning the photographs over in my hands, piecing together a life lost to time. They weren't just ghosts haunting a house. They were people. Living, breathing, loving people who had been forgotten. Until now. As night approached once more, I remained in the attic, watching the light fade through the small, dusty window. The quiet crept in again, slow and gentle. And for the first time since I arrived, it didn't feel oppressive. It felt peaceful. As if the house was finally resting, its story shared, its voice heard. I whispered softly into the growing dark. I'll tell your story. The wind shifted outside, brushing against the roof like a sigh of relief. And for a fleeting moment, I felt a warmth beside me, as though someone sat close, quietly grateful. I descended the stairs as darkness swallowed the house once again. No footsteps chased me this time. No laughter echoed from unseen rooms. Only silence. And within that silence, peace. I left the house in the cool stillness of night. The stars hung low between the pines, casting faint silver light across the ground. The air was quiet, but not empty. Somehow, the house felt lighter. The forest less watchful. As though both were finally letting go of something they'd clung to for too long. I returned to my car and sat in the driver's seat, staring at the house through the trees. I knew I might come back one day. Stories like this don't leave you. But for now, it was enough. The house could rest. And so could I. As I drove away, the road stretched long and empty ahead of me. But the voice of the forest followed me, soft as a lullaby, don't forget. And I wouldn't. Not now. Not ever. The next morning, I left the forest behind me. But the house stayed with me, like the faint memory of a forgotten dream. I drove into town, the winding roads gradually giving way to cracked sidewalks and sleepy streets. It was a quiet town. The kind where the buildings seemed to lean on each other for support, their paint fading, their windows dusty with time. Life moved slower here, as though no one was in a hurry to leave the past behind. I parked by the small town library, its weathered stone steps warmed by the morning sun. Something told me the answers I sought had been waiting here, too. Inside, the library smelled of worn paper and polished wood. The librarian was an older woman with silver hair and a voice like soft leaves brushing the ground. She looked up from her desk as I approached, offering a kind smile that didn't quite reach her tired eyes. "Looking for something special?" she asked. I nodded, hesitating for a moment before speaking. "I'm looking for information on the old house in the pines. The one past the northern ridge." Her smile faded slightly, replaced by something quieter. Recognition. And caution. She gestured toward the archives in the back, her voice soft. "Records go back about 100 years. Not many ask about that house anymore. Most try to forget. But forgetting was never what I came for." The archives were quiet, save for the soft hum of the overhead lights and the occasional creak of the floor beneath my feet. I sifted through brittle newspapers, faded deeds, and yellowing letters. The house had a name once, the Marrow Estate. Built by Jonathan and Eleanor Marrow in 1892. A family of quiet wealth and private sorrows. Records showed they had one daughter, Lily. Bright. Curious. And in the winter of 1904, she disappeared. No body was ever found. No explanation ever given. Just gone, as though the earth itself had swallowed her whole. I found an article dated weeks after her disappearance. The headline read, "Family secluded after daughter's vanishing." It spoke of grief. Of a house that grew darker by the day. Neighbors claimed the woods grew silent. That voices could be heard from the trees at night. And that Eleanor Marrow, once seen tending the gardens, was no longer spotted outside. Jonathan was said to wander the woods alone, speaking softly to the shadows. And then, one spring morning, they too were gone. The house left empty. Doors open. Chairs overturned. As though the family had simply stepped out and never returned. No one claimed the house after that. It stood empty, year after year, forgotten beneath the weight of its silence. I sat for a long while, the words of those articles resting heavily on my mind. They weren't just names in brittle newspapers. They were people I had walked beside, if only through echoes. The whispers in the house, the letters on the desk, the small hand in mine, all pieces of the story the town had buried beneath its quiet. But stories don't stay buried forever. They wait for someone to listen. I left the archives as the afternoon light faded. Stepping back onto the street, I noticed how the townspeople moved. Slow, cautious, as if some part of them still felt the shadow of the woods nearby. I wondered how many of them remembered. How many had family who once spoke of the Marrow Estate? And how many chose, instead, to forget? That evening, I sat alone at a diner on the edge of town. The coffee was warm, and the waitress spoke kindly but quickly, like someone who didn't want to linger on old ghosts. As I sipped in silence, I noticed an elderly man sitting at the counter. Thin, quiet, his face weathered like driftwood. He caught my gaze for a moment and gave a slow nod. As though he knew why I was here. As though he, too, had heard the whispers. I gathered the courage to approach. "Do you know the house in the pines?" I asked softly. He stirred his coffee, watching the cream spiral outward before answering. "Been there once. Long ago. When I was a boy." His voice was slow, distant. "My father used to tell me the story. Said the house never forgot what happened inside its walls. Said the girl's laughter still echoed when the wind was just right." He paused, his eyes far away now. "And some nights, if you listen close enough, she still calls out. Not to scare you. Just so you remember she was real." I thanked him quietly, leaving him to his thoughts. Outside, night had settled once again, soft and heavy across the town. I stood beneath the streetlights, their glow too thin to push back the darkness of the woods beyond. I thought of the house, resting alone in the pines. And Lily, her story still unfinished, waiting for someone to carry it forward. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to the distant hush of wind through the trees. It felt like a lullaby, low and steady, almost comforting in its sadness. I thought of returning to the house. Not to chase ghosts, but to listen. To let the quiet tell me what the archives could not. The silent years. The lonely nights. The forgotten laughter. All waiting in the empty rooms where shadows gathered like old friends. Morning came slowly, pale and cold. The town stirred beneath the mist, shops opening one by one, people beginning their quiet routines. But for me, the road pointed north again. Back through the trees. Back to the story I had not yet finished reading. I drove slowly, the miles unfolding like chapters in a fading book. The pines welcomed me back with their usual hush, tall and watchful. The air felt colder this time. Not unfriendly. Just aware. As though the forest recognized my return. And there it was. The house, still and waiting. No different from before. And yet, something had changed. Maybe it was me. I stepped out of the car and walked the familiar path, the pine needles soft beneath my shoes. The front door creaked open with the same tired sigh, and I stepped inside. The air wrapped around me like an old coat, familiar and cold. I stood in the foyer, listening. The house greeted me in its quiet way. And somewhere, faint but certain, I heard it, a child's laughter, distant and soft, like wind brushing through autumn leaves. It didn't frighten me anymore. It felt almost like welcome. I smiled, small and tired, and whispered into the stillness, "I'm back." The floor creaked gently beneath my feet, and the shadows shifted, almost at ease. And just like that, the house settled into silence once more, as if it had been waiting for those words all along. The house felt softer now. The walls no longer pressed inward. The shadows no longer waited to frighten. Instead, the silence stretched before me like an invitation. So I walked deeper, letting my footsteps echo gently across the dusty floors. I wandered first to the kitchen, where the old kettle still rested on the stove, long cold but not forgotten. Dust coated the shelves like thin snow. And in the center of the table, I found a single glass marble. Small, clear, catching the fading light through the window like a frozen drop of water. I picked it up, rolling it between my fingers. It felt strangely warm, as though someone had held it not long ago. Perhaps Lily had once played with this. Perhaps it was hers still. I placed the marble in my pocket, and the house seemed to sigh, as if grateful for its safekeeping. Next, I found myself back in the study. The air here was different. Thicker, somehow. Filled with the weight of words never spoken aloud. I ran my fingers along the spines of forgotten books, their titles faded beyond recognition. A diary lay open on the desk, its pages yellowed with age. I read the final entry, my voice barely above a whisper. I hear her now in the walls, calling softly, afraid of the dark. I have tried to protect her, but something beyond these walls hungers for the joy we once knew. If anyone finds this, please, listen to her. Help her find her way home. The entry ended there. No signature. But the ink trailed off at the end, as though the writer had been pulled away mid-thought. I closed the diary and sat quietly for a long while, listening. But there was only stillness. No voices. No footsteps. Just the slow rhythm of the house breathing around me. As evening drifted in, I climbed once again to the attic. The light from the small window stretched long and golden across the wooden floor. And in that light, I saw her. Lily. Standing quietly beside an old trunk, her pale dress glowing faintly in the dusk. She smiled softly, as if she had been waiting for me. Not a ghost. Not a shadow. But a memory made gentle and kind. I didn't speak at first. I simply sat down across from her, letting the quiet settle between us like old friends. After a long pause, she tilted her head and whispered, "Did you find the well?" I nodded slowly. "Yes. I heard your voice there." Her smile faded just a little. "That's where I tried to hide. When the dark came." Her voice was soft, distant, like wind slipping through cracks in old wood. But it found me anyway. I wanted to reach out, to comfort her. But I knew better. She wasn't asking for saving. Only for someone to listen. "Do you still hear it?" I asked gently. She shook her head, her hair falling softly across her face. "Not so much now. Since you came." She stepped to the window and gazed out across the pines, their tops swaying gently in the wind. "I miss the sun," she said quietly. I watched as her outline grew thinner in the fading light. "Then let's find a way to bring it back," I whispered. She turned back to me, a small laugh escaping her lips. It was the first sound of joy I had heard in this house. Soft. Real. And in that moment, the shadows seemed to lift just a little. I spent the night in the attic, the two of us sitting quietly beside the window. We spoke of small things. The sound of birds in the morning. The scent of pine needles after rain. The way light used to fall across the garden where she once played. Nothing grand. Just the gentle stitching of forgotten moments into something whole again. At some point, I drifted to sleep. And in my dreams, I walked through the house once more. But this time, the rooms were filled with soft golden light. The kitchen smelled of baking bread. The study walls hummed with quiet laughter. And in the garden, Lily danced beneath the summer sky, spinning slowly, her arms stretched wide. When I woke, morning light filtered through the attic window. The house felt warmer, quieter, but not empty. I looked for Lily, but she was gone. Only the soft impression of her presence remained, like the last notes of a lullaby fading into silence. I stood, stretching stiff limbs, and walked slowly down the stairs. The house didn't creak beneath my steps anymore. It felt lighter, somehow, as though the years of sorrow had finally begun to lift. In the front hall, I paused. A single daisy rested on the windowsill. Bright, simple, alive. I smiled. The first flower I'd seen since I arrived. Perhaps a gift. Perhaps a sign. Either way, I placed it gently in my pocket beside the marble. I stepped outside into the morning air. The forest stretched out before me, no longer watching, simply existing. Birds called softly between the branches. The wind stirred the leaves with a gentle sigh. And the house stood behind me, quiet and whole. Not empty. Just resting. I walked the familiar path back to my car, the ground soft beneath my steps. And as I opened the door, I felt it, not a chill, not a warning, but a quiet farewell. A thank you, carried on the breeze. As I drove away, the road stretched endlessly ahead, winding gently between the trees. The house faded from view, but its presence remained beside me, calm and steady. I knew I would carry it with me. Not as a burden, but as a story. A memory. A quiet promise to never let the forgotten be truly lost. That night, in a quiet motel on the edge of town, I fell asleep beneath a sky full of stars. And in my dreams, I heard laughter again. Soft. Bright. Free. I left the town beneath a pale morning sky, the sun barely rising above the distant hills. The road stretched out before me, quiet and long, winding through empty fields and sleeping woods. For the first time in what felt like weeks, the weight on my shoulders had lightened. The house was behind me now, but I could still feel its quiet presence at my side, no longer cold, but warm, like the memory of an old friend. The further I drove, the more the forest thinned. Pines gave way to open meadows, and the hush of branches swaying overhead became the soft hum of distant highways. I passed small towns and quiet crossroads, places where strangers still smiled to one another, not knowing the weight of forgotten stories hidden in the places they passed each day. I wondered how many other houses like the Marrow estate still stood in distant corners of the world, waiting, patient, their stories tucked beneath layers of dust and silence. When I stopped for gas hours later, the clerk behind the counter gave me a curious look. "You from around here?" he asked, his voice casual. I smiled softly, shaking my head. "Just passing through." He nodded, handing me my change without another question. That's how it was in places like this. No one asked where you'd been. They simply let you go. By nightfall, I reached the outskirts of the city. The glow of distant lights painted the sky in soft orange and gold. The streets buzzed faintly with life, cars weaving between one another, people walking beneath neon signs and quiet windows. I found a small apartment where the air was warm and still, and for the first time in days, I unpacked my things. The marble from the kitchen rested in my palm, smooth and cool once again. The daisy from the windowsill, now dried and fragile, lay beside it on the dresser. I placed them both beneath a small glass jar. Not as trophies, but as reminders that some stories ask only to be remembered. Sleep came easier that night. No whispers. No shadows. Only the soft hum of distant city life, steady and reassuring. In my dreams, I walked again through the house, but this time it was full of light. Lily danced through the garden, sunlight tangled in her hair, laughter rising like birdsong through the trees. She waved as I passed by, and I waved back. No word spoken. None needed. When I woke, the morning was bright and quiet. I sat by the window, coffee warming my hands, and let my thoughts drift. I thought of the house. And how, in some ways, I had never truly left. But that was all right. Some places become part of you. Not as burdens, but as quiet places inside your heart where stories live on. Weeks passed. Life moved forward in its quiet way. I returned to work, saw familiar faces, walked familiar streets. But sometimes, in the quiet hours of evening, I found myself writing. Letters. Stories. Fragments of the house, the woods, the well. Pieces of Lily's laughter carried on paper instead of wind. I didn't share them with anyone. Not yet. But perhaps one day. Perhaps when the world was quiet enough to listen. And sometimes, just before sleep, would hear it. The soft sound of laughter, distant and fading. Not haunting. Not warning. Just there. A reminder that some voices, once heard, never fully leave you. On one such night, beneath a sky thick with stars, I whispered softly into the stillness, I remember. And somewhere far away, where the pines still swayed and the shadows slept, I imagined the house settling deeper into its rest. Content, at last, to be remembered kindly. And so it was. I turned off the light, laid my head against the pillow, and let the quiet take me home. The end.